Series. Uh-oh, Siri thinks I'm talking to her again. Oh, no, it says recording in progress. Okay, good. So I've read, so I'm reading Robert Crace books, Elvis Cole novels. Well, he's a Los Angeles detective. Every once in a while, he makes his way out here. And the one I just finished reading, there's a shootout at a house off of Highway 62 in North Palm Springs. I know the house. I've been there. A friend of mine used to live there. So I can visualize it. So what I'm getting at is when you read the Bible, it will make a great difference to you, whether you go to Israel or not. The fact that you've been able to see the places and you can visualize them in your mind. Okay? So that's what this class is about. I have put out on these front tables here a couple of maps. One for old folks. One for young folks. They were written by people who obviously make their living writing prescription labels. So anyway, this is what Israel looks like. Feel free to take a look at these. This is a map that's going to show some stuff we're going to talk about. But before we do, this is a tradition we have. Oh, and I've got to talk about this too. Uh-oh, okay, so this is being recorded, so I guess I get to go over here and say, got it. There it is right there. All right, Jim is recording this class. The reason is so we can post it online for anyone who's not able to be here, all right? The books I've given you, that's just the month of October. That is the places we will see when we first get to Israel and our first day of the 10-day trip. I'm working right now on the series for November and December. That's going to take us days 4 and 5 and so on. And this is going to carry us all the way through to the time we make the trip. So hope you'll pick these up and keep them, make your notes, whatever in them. Something I got to mention today. Did y'all hear the announcement about the 8 o'clock service? It will be starting Veterans Day weekend in Auditorium 3 at 8 o'clock. It will be traditional hymn type music. I'll be leading the service. And so those of you who have been interested in that kind of a thing, please come. We'll have our 8 o'clock worship service, and then we'll have our ambassadors class. So this is going to go straight through. The Israel class is going to go straight through. We're going to work out all the details of that, but I was glad they announced it this morning because that's what the plan is. So those of you who've been coming at 8 o'clock, come on at 8 o'clock. Auditorium 3. They're going to get it set up for us. All right. One of the traditions we have in this class is we start with singing a song. And so we're going to do that now. And this song, and if we have time, another one at the end. Most of you know this song, right? The Lily of the Valley? No. You don't know this song? Okay. Well, you're going to learn it. The valley it's referring to is on this map right here. It's called the Sharon Plain. And Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 1, has the individual saying, in the picture, it's a woman talking to her beloved, and people have thought historically that it was Jesus being identified there, but maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Modern thinking is probably wasn't. But this song depicts Jesus in 2 terms that are found in that particular, well, actually, this one just does 1. But she says, I am a lily of the valley, a rose of Sharon. And that's talking about the Sharon Plain, which we will talk about a little bit later today. Okay? If you don't know the song, it's not hard to learn.
Valley, in him alone I see all the need to cleanse and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He tells me every care on him to roll. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 2,000 to my soul. He forsaken, and all my idols torn from my heart, and now he keeps me by his power. Oh, all the world forsake me, and Satan tempt me sore. Through Jesus I shall safely reach the goal. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He'll never, never leave me, nor yet forsake me here, while I live by faith and do his blessed will. All the fire about me, I've nothing now to fear. From his manna he my hungry soul shall fill. Then sweeping up to glory to see his blessed face, where rivers of delight shall ever roll. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul.
All right, isn't that a great song? And there are so many visual pictures we could spend a whole class just talking about, you know, the bright and morning star, the fairest of, all those things, but we don't have time. So, very quickly, what's the most interesting thing you heard in today's sermon? Anybody? The wind blowing. The word for wind in Hebrew and in Greek also refers to spirit. Ruach in Hebrew, pneuma in Greek is a word that some context uses for spirit, sometimes for wind. And there are a lot of times in the Gospels you'll find Jesus using these words that have kind of a double meaning. In fact, in the story of Nicodemus, when Jesus says you must be born again, the Greek word that he uses there is not the normal word for again. The normal word for again is palin. The word he uses is anothen. Now, anothen, and you're aware of the fact that words have a variety of meanings, right? If you want to know what a word means, I had a cousin who was a professor at Abilene Christian University, and I remember very well him saying, the only thing that determines the meaning of a word is its use in a context. Context determines meaning, okay? And the word anothen is one of those words. It can mean up, it can mean back, it can mean again, it can mean from above. It can mean any of those things depending upon the context. Well, Jesus says you must be born anothen. Nicodemus runs through his thesaurus there, and he comes up with, well, the only one that seems to fit is again. And so he says, how can you do that? You know, I'm a whole lot bigger than I was when I was born. And that's not likely to happen, right? Jesus had a different meaning in mind. He had the meaning from above. And so he clarifies it, born of water and the Spirit, which is that birth from above, okay? So a lot of times Jesus does that. And that's something that I think is really important when you read the Gospels. You just don't just pick up a translation and say, whatever that translation says is what it means. Do a little research. Find out if there's maybe some hidden meanings, some nuances there. Okay, anything else that you guys thought was really interesting in the sermon? All right.
Just to put it in some context, because I've worked in the prison system for 30 years, when you look like older Adam keys, and so I was able to visualize it. It was meaningful to me.
Okay. We have a correctional officer, deputy, lieutenant. Okay, lieutenant who worked in the prison system and who knows how those keys work. Those are honking keys. My deputy's got one of those things. My goodness, you could never pick that lock. But there's a door between my courtroom and the holding cell, and he's got this huge key, and he has to check it out every morning and check it in every afternoon and all of that. I can only imagine the same thing in the jails. I got to tell you, he was talking about these people in the jail saying, hey, Pastor, you know, I know you. I went to your church, right? Let me tell you what happened to me one time. And I see people all the time, and they know me, and I don't know them. And oftentimes I'll tell them, it may not be a good thing if I know you. It really might not. For those of you who don't know, I got a day job. I'm a judge. Okay, so it depends on where I've seen him. But one day, I'm serious. This is absolute truth. we had a neighbor move in next door, and he was renting the place. And I went over to introduce myself to him, and he said, "You sent me to prison." I did? Yeah. Well, how'd that work out for you? He says, "The best thing that ever happened." He says, "I got 2 strikes, but I'm being good." Well, that's good. I was glad to know that. He's living next door. All right. Anyway, so this world is a small world, folks. It really is. Okay, well, let's move on to our class, because that's what we're here for today. We talked about, we're going to move right through this slide here. This is just the outline of the sermon. But let's talk about Lydda and Joppa. And before we do that, I've got a video that I want to show you. But I want you to think about these 2 passages. Isaiah 49, verse 6. This is the New Living Translation. This is God speaking to his servant. Isaiah talks about a suffering servant, and the suffering servant is God's messenger. And here's what God says to his messenger. Who's the suffering servant? Jesus, right? We know that. Isaiah didn't know that, okay? He says, "You will do more than restore the people of Israel to me. I will make you a light to the Gentiles, and you will bring my salvation to the ends of the earth." God's intent from the Messiah was to not only restore Israel, but to bring light to the Gentiles. Any of you know any Gentiles? If you know a Gentile, raise your hand. Yeah, look around. If you don't know one, introduce yourself. We're Gentiles, right? Okay. Now then, notice what Jesus says to his disciples in Acts 1:8 as he introduces the scope of the book of Acts. "You will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Do you see any similarity between those 2 passages? To the ends of the earth, to the ends of the earth. All people, the Gentiles, the Jews, everybody, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth, right? Acts starts out with Luke saying to Theophilus, "The former letter I wrote to you about all the things Jesus began to do and to teach." Let me suggest to you the book of Acts is what Jesus continued to do and to teach in the church. Okay, it's just a continuation of the same gospel. Now, why do I want to mention this? Well, because notice that word Gentiles up there in Isaiah 49:6. In the Hebrew translation, and the reason I mention that is because Isaiah was originally written in Hebrew. In the Greek translation of the Hebrew, that word is the same word that we see throughout the New Testament in a variety of meanings. It means nations. It means Gentiles. The Greek word is ethnos. We would spell it ethnos, ethnos. Can you think of an English word we get from that? Ethnic. We talk about being a what? Multi-ethnic church, right? Multi-ethnic church. Let me tell you something. In the 1st century, we were the ethnics. You and I, the Gentiles. We were the ethnics, okay? We were the ones who were on the outside looking in. Does that suggest anything to you about how we ought to treat people who are on the outside looking in? It does, doesn't it? Okay, why do I want to start with Acts 1, verse 8? We're talking about Israel. Well, let me tell you a little about Israel. If you want to do this, you can get this book on Amazon. It's a little pricey, but it's called the Satellite Bible Atlas. I'm going to show a few videos as we get into this class on Israel that kind of will explain those 2 maps to you.
Shalom, and welcome to the Satellite Bible Atlas, video number 1. In this video, we introduce the general location of the land of Israel and how it functions as a land bridge between 3 continents. We recommend keeping your Satellite Bible Atlas handy, since you can pause the video at any time to look at the maps with better resolution and clarity in the atlas. First, let's note where Israel is located. The land of the Bible sits at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. It is a land bridge between 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. The land of the Bible is not a make-believe or fairyland, but a real place on our earth. The Bible is a record of real events that happen to real people at real places. In a nutshell, this is the message of the Bible. The divine, transcendent God who created everything is involved with man's world. God's involvement is not in an abstract way, but in concrete ways involving real people, real events, real places on our real earth. The land of Israel is relatively small. Here, Israel's size, the blue shape, is compared to the size of the United States. Or compare the size of Israel to California here on the left. Or note on the right, Israel's landmass is about the same size as New Jersey, the fifth smallest state in the United States. But in spite of Israel's relatively small size, this little land has had a huge impact upon history. This is undoubtedly because of God's association with the land and people of Israel. The Lord says in Ezekiel 5:5, "This is Jerusalem. I have set her in the center of the nations, with countries all around her." God indicates in the scriptures that he would make himself known to the world through the people of Israel in the land of Israel. Events in this small land would give evidence that the God of the Bible is the true God and that there is no other. Map 12.1 in the Satellite Bible Atlas shows the borders of the modern countries in the Middle East. Let's take a closer look at Israel's position as a land bridge between three continents. Note the two ancient cradles of civilization, Mesopotamia and Egypt. The route between Mesopotamia and Egypt is funneled through the land of Israel because the Arabian Desert to the east and the Mediterranean Sea on the west present difficult obstacles for travel. As a land bridge between continents, the land of Israel has historically been coveted by big empires in Egypt and Asia. Any kingdom interested in expanding military, economic, and political interests would set its sights on Israel as a bridge for expansion. Later in history, Europe got into the picture. This is a well-chosen land for the Lord of the earth to demonstrate in sometimes subtle yet concrete ways his sovereignty over the kingdoms of men. The history of the Jewish people with the land of Israel is evidence that the God of the Bible is the true God who alone transcends time and space. Before we look closer at the land of Israel, there are a few other features and terms of the ancient Near East to be familiar with. We will use map 2.1, a map showing Abram's migration from Mesopotamia to Canaan, to mark out the Fertile Crescent. This is an area shaped like a crescent that extends from the Persian Gulf north along the Tigris and Euphrates river basins through modern Syria, and then down along the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. It is a land with enough water, either from rivers or rain, to produce crops. The Fertile Crescent is made up of two parts. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers, the Euphrates and Tigris. This is where Iraq is today, and in ancient times was the center of both the Assyrian and Babylonian empires. The other part of the Fertile Crescent is called the Levant, which is the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. Levant means raised up. The area is characterized by hills and valleys, plateaus and mountains, some over 9,000 feet in elevation. The Levant includes the land of Israel, which was called Canaan in Abraham's time. To briefly review the main concepts presented in this video, the land of the Bible is a real place on our earth. The Bible describes real people, real events, and real places. The Bible is a record of God's involvement with the real world of mankind. Next, the land of the Bible is situated as a land bridge between three continents. Empires in Asia, Africa, and Europe have coveted this land as a bridge for expansion. We mentioned that the central position of the land and people of Israel ultimately testifies to the transcendence and sovereignty of the God of the Bible. We also learned the location of the Fertile Crescent, including its two parts, Mesopotamia and the Levant. In our next video, we will take a closer look at the distinctive geographical regions of the land of Israel.
Okay, does that help you to kind of visualize the overall picture? This is kind of the satellite 30,000 foot view of Israel. You heard about the Fertile Crescent before. Whoops, didn't want to do that. Wanted to back that one up. Okay. Okay. I tried it this morning and it worked. But it didn't go into now naturally. That's okay. The Fertile Crescent, you get a picture, right? That green area. That's the reason that in the Bible you read about the major empires of Assyria and Egypt, or Babylon and Egypt. Okay? Because those are the two areas that conflict over the land of Israel. And I'm going to show you in just a second a video of the different terrain in Israel. But let's move on here. Really, in Genesis 10, okay. In Genesis 10, you've got the story of how Noah's descendants spread out over the earth, right? You've got Japheth taking the area of Europe, that area. You've got Shem taking the area of Asia. You've got Ham taking the area of Egypt, okay? Can you see how those three overlap and where they overlap? They overlap in Israel. That's where they overlap. That's the central point in ancient history. That's the place where all the struggles took place. Now, in a few weeks, we're going to talk about a place called Megiddo. Everybody gets all excited about Megiddo, you know? Okay, I'm going to explain its significance based upon this right here, okay? All right, anyway, that's kind of the layout of Israel. Now, I want to show you the basic regions and regional variety, and this is the second video. The last one we'll do today.
Welcome to the Satellite Bible Atlas, video number 2. This video introduces the basic geography and regions of the land of Israel. We noted in the previous video, the land of Israel is relatively small. It is about the same size as the state of New Jersey, the 5th smallest state in the United States. On map 1.1 in the Satellite Bible Atlas, note that the heartland of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, is only 150 miles long. From Joppa on the Mediterranean coast to the Jordan River is only 45 miles. However, in this small land, there's great geographical variety. One region varies significantly from another, even though the regions are only a few miles apart. Map 12.3, the last map in the Satellite Bible Atlas, shows the various regions of the land outlined schematically. Each shape or outline shows a different region. Look how even the area of Judah in the south breaks down into 7 very distinct regions: the coastal plain, the Shpela or foothills, the hill country, the Judean wilderness, the Dead Sea, the Negev or dry basin, and the wilderness highlands. This regional diversity has its effect on both biblical and modern history. The land's history has tended to be characterized by different ethnic groups who maintain independent political rule in different geographical regions. Peace and unity between all groups is seldom, if ever, realized. Here we are taught that real peace is obtained only when God rules men's hearts. As an historical example of the geographical and ethnic diversity in the land, note map 4.2, which shows the area that Israel was and was not able to conquer and settle in the days of Joshua and then afterwards in the time of the Judges. Israel was able to settle in large sections of Transjordan here, and all the way up into Bashan, and also in the hill country, parts of the hill country in Galilee. But Israel was not able to settle in the coastal plain or in the Jezreel Valley or north of the Sea of Galilee. Let's see some of the regional and geographical variety in this small land.
Well, here we are in the land of Israel, and in fact, contrary to common belief, most of it is not a desert.
We're in the hill country of Judah, which you can see is very forested, and we're near the biblical site of Kiryat Yarim.
Which means village of the forest.
The variety in Israel includes everything from lush green and waterfalls near Mount Hermon, the well-watered districts around the Sea of Galilee, agriculturally rich plains like the Jezreel Valley, the rugged hill country of Judah near Jerusalem. This hilltop is the ancient town of Kiryat Yarim, just mentioned by the gal in the video. The Ark of the Covenant stayed here for 20 years before Samuel led a national repentance. Later, David brought the Ark from here into Jerusalem. Here's the modern road leading into Jerusalem. And yes, deserts, like the rocky terrain of the Judean wilderness between Jerusalem and Jericho. On map 115, let's mark out the 4 major longitudinal zones, or zones that basically run north-south, that make up the land of the Bible. These zones subdivide into smaller regions, as we will see later, but a basic understanding of the regions of the land of the Bible starts with these 4 zones. First is the coastal plain, a strip of agriculturally productive land, some 8 to 12 miles wide, that runs parallel to the Mediterranean Sea coast. This region tended to have an international aspect to it, since big empires traveling between Mesopotamia and Egypt wanted it. The Philistines settled here. Ancient Israel was seldom able to control it. Next is the hill country. Jerusalem, number 15 on this map, sits on the watershed of the hill country at some 2,400 to 2,800 feet above sea level. The hill country is rough terrain of deep valleys and high ridges. It extends north and includes Mount Carmel, which juts out into the Mediterranean Sea, and Galilee. Note here a break in the hill country, which separates the hill country of Judah and Ephraim from Galilee in the north. The break is a wide plain, the triangular or arrowhead-shaped Jezreel Valley. The third north-south zone is the Rift Valley. This is part of the longest rift on the surface of the earth, the Great Syro-African Rift that runs from Turkey to Kenya. Here, the Rift Valley is a 10-mile wide plain or trench, which separates the hill country here in the west from the high Transjordan Plateau in the east. Much of the Rift Valley in Israel is below sea level. The surface of the Sea of Galilee is 700 feet below sea level. The Jordan River descends another 650 feet to the lowest spot on the earth, the Dead Sea. The surface of the Dead Sea is 1,350 feet below sea level. The unique depth of the Rift Valley, especially around the Dead Sea, is one reason there's so much geographical variety in this area. The Dead Sea is only 15 miles from Jerusalem. It is a totally different geographical zone. The fourth major longitudinal zone is the Transjordan Plateau. It can reach over 3,000 feet in elevation and includes the areas around ancient Moab, a plateau, Gilead, and Bashan, all the way up to Mount Hermon. There they are, the 4 major longitudinal zones of the land of the Bible: coastal plain, the hill country, the Rift Valley, and the Transjordan Plateau. Another important feature of the geography of the land of the Bible is rainfall. Believe it or not, Jerusalem receives as much rainfall as London, between 22 to 24 inches each year. The difference is that Israel's rainfall comes in about 5 months, between November and March, with the wettest months being in January and February. So when it rains, it can pour. Rainfall in Israel varies greatly from region to region. This is especially because the Rift Valley is in the rain shadow of the hill country. Note on this cross-section diagram how most of the rain falls on the western side of the hill country watershed. Jerusalem sits here on the watershed. But east of Jerusalem, there is a severe drop in elevation into the Rift Valley. The clouds dissipate and less rain falls the further one descends toward the Dead Sea. As mentioned, Jerusalem can get 24 inches of rain a year, but only 15 miles away, Jericho in the Rift Valley near the Dead Sea gets only 4 inches of rain per year. This variance in rainfall from region to region contributes to great geographical variety in the land. Let's see a winter rainfall in the hill country of Judah near Jerusalem. Israel has no major river that grants a continuous supply of water. Rather, as Deuteronomy 11:11 says, it is a land dependent on God's yearly provision that drinks rain from heaven. To review, the heartland of the land of Israel is only 150 by 45 miles. Yet this small land contains great geographical variety. The geographical variety has put its stamp on the land's history. We learned about the 4 major longitudinal or north-south running zones of the land of the Bible: the coastal plain, the hill country, the Rift Valley, and the Transjordan Plateau. Finally, we noted that Jerusalem receives as much rainfall as London, some 24 inches a year. However, rain falls only in the winter months, so the land of the Bible experiences long, dry summers. Without the winter rains, life quickly ceases. The writers of Scripture make it clear that man is dependent on God to send life-giving rain.
All right, so basically what you've got is those 4 regions. And the did you notice anything that seemed kind of like your own experience in that particular video? Like what? Yeah, Coachella Valley. All the rain falls on the other side, and none of it gets here, right? That's the same type of thing, rain shadow. There is an elevation drop between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea of about 4,300 feet. And that's the surface of the Dead Sea, 1,300 people, 50 feet below sea level. It's 1,300 feet deep on top of that. And it's very interesting. But anyway, now I want to talk a little bit about the places that we're going to see. Now, the first two places we talk about today are not places we're going to visit. The rest of them are, except that we are going to land at the airport, right? Okay, the airport, most people think is in Tel Aviv. The airport is not in Tel Aviv. It's in a suburb of Tel Aviv that in the Old Testament is called Lod. In the New Testament it's called Lydda. In fact, until 1973, it was called the Lydda Airport. They changed the name to the Ben Gurion Airport to name it after the first prime minister of the nation of Israel, David Ben Gurion. So when we go to Lydda, when we land there, we're going to be landing in a place that was visited in the book of Acts. And I made reference there to Acts 9:35, all the residents of Lydda and Sharon. Remember what Sharon is? Sharon is that plain, remember? Yeah. Sharon is that plain right along the Jordan River, okay? I mean, not right along, I'm sorry, the Mediterranean Sea. And Lydda is kind of at the southern end of that, okay? And that's where we're going to be landing when we go to Israel. I want to get you kind of a sense of where we're going to be looking at. Lydda Joppa is only 11 miles from Lydda. That gives you a sense of perspective there. The plain of Sharon runs between the Lydda Joppa area and up to Mount Carmel. Caesarea Maritima is the first actual place we'll actually visit on day 3. We'll talk about it next week. I wanted to give plenty of time for it. Notice that name, Via Maris. Via Maris. That's Latin. It means way of the sea. You'll read about the way of the sea. And we'll talk about it, especially when we get to Jesus' ministry. In fact, look with me very briefly, if you've got your Bibles, at Matthew chapter 4, I'm sorry. Matthew chapter 4, right after the temptation of Jesus, verse 12, or verse 13, leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, that's the Sea of Galilee, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea. That's the name of that highway. Beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. Galilee of the nations, literally. Ethnos is that word there, okay? That one I told you about. So anyway, we're going to talk about those, but today I want to talk about Lod and Lydda and Joppa. Lod, did you know this city? It was established in the 8000 BC era. It was established in the Stone Age. It is the oldest continuously inhabited location in the world. Most people think it's Damascus. Damascus is not quite as old as Lydda and Lod. It's referred to as far back as the 14th, 15th century BC by Thutmose III. Thutmose III was a pharaoh that would be contemporary with Moses. If people accept two different dates for the Exodus. If you accept the earlier date for the Exodus, that would mean Thutmose III would be the pharaoh when Moses is in Midian tending sheep. And he would be the pharaoh who died just before Moses came back to lead the Israelites out. But Thutmose referred to it. He referred to it in a list of cities that he conquered that's listed in the Temple of Amun-Ra in Luxor, Egypt. And that's Egypt. That's not Israel, okay? What do we know about it? We don't know much from the Bible. The Bible says that it was built by a descendant of Benjamin. This is 1 Chronicles 8:12, the sons of Elpaal, who's a grandson of Benjamin, Eber, Misham, and Shemed, who built Ono and Lod with its towns. There's Lod right there, okay? We know that. It appears when the land was divided among the tribes, it appears to have been in the original allocation to Dan. But you may remember that the tribe of Dan, as was stated in that video, had difficulty securing and controlling that area. So what they did is they vacated that area, moved up north of the Sea of Galilee, and established their tribal area at the base of Mount Hermon that we'll talk about in a few weeks. But that's where it appears to be. When you see the word Tel Aviv right here, you're looking at Lod right here and Joppa right here, okay? All right. What do we know about it? Well, we know that when the Israelites returned from the Babylonian exile, about 725 of the descendants of Benjamin came back and resettled in Lod, Hadid, and Ono. That's referred to by Ezra and Nehemiah, but we really don't know much about it. Today, it's called Lod. Until recently, it was called El-Lud. Prior to that, it was called Lydda. And that's what it was called in the New Testament. It's about 25 miles northwest of Jerusalem, about 11, 12 miles southeast of Joppa. And by the end of the first century, it was a big-sized town. In fact, it was one of the major theological centers of Israel in the middle and end of the first century. It had a population of about 20,000, I think. Let me double check that. No, 2,500. Okay, I thought that sounded too big. 2,500 population, which, now think about it. In a day when the biggest city in the world had 1 million, 2,500 isn't that small, right? I mean, to us, we say 2,500. 2,500 in that day was the second most important city in the world, had about 250,000 people in it. Okay, so 2,500 is no small potatoes. All right, but what we know about it from the New Testament is this is where Peter healed Aeneas. Remember that story? Acts 9, verses 32 to 35. All right. This is a picture of Lod in 1920, what it will look like then. This is St. George's Church right there. And this, of course, is the airport that we'll be landing in. Now, why do I want to mention Lod? Well, for one thing, that's where we enter Israel. But I think it fits into the bigger biblical narrative when we think about who got there and how they got there. When Peter gets to Lydda, he finds disciples already there, right? There's this Aeneas, who's a disciple. How did disciples get in Lydda prior to Peter arriving there? Well, back in Acts 8, the Bible says that Saul's persecution began in earnest in Jerusalem after the death of Stephen, right? And because of that, the disciples were scattered. In Acts 8, you read in particular about Philip. Philip, who leaves Jerusalem, goes to Samaria. Samaria is the city that's called Nablus on this map right here. Nablus is right at the area of Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, right there. Nablus is the ancient city of Samaria. So Philip goes up there, and from up there, the Lord says, I want you to go down south. And so he goes about 40 miles south to the road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza. Incidentally, you've heard of the Gaza Strip, right? You know, people get really upset when people from Gaza start shooting missiles at Israel. They really do, right? Okay. Well, let's see. Here's Gaza right here. And here's Tel Aviv right there. That would be like shooting missiles from, you think of the name? What's the name of the town south of San Diego, just in Mexico? Tijuana. I don't ever go down there. Okay. That would be like Tijuana shooting missiles at San Diego. How long do you think we let that go on? Okay. All right. But anyway, so Philip winds up down there. He teaches and baptizes that Ethiopian eunuch that was mentioned in the sermon today. Then he moves on down the coast and then starts heading up to Caesarea. In the meantime, Peter leaves Jerusalem. He goes over to Lydda, finds some disciples there. There's a fellow named Aeneas who's lame and paralyzed. He heals him. And then he gets word that he needs to come over to a place called Joppa. And the reason I put this in here, is because I want you to see how God is working things out to do exactly what he promised. Take the message, not just to the Jews, but also to the ethnics, the Gentiles, you and me. Okay? All right. So there's Joppa. That's the way Joppa looks today. Now, I want you to pay particular attention. Let me see if this is going to work now. Nope. Okay. Did it? No. Fooey. That's interesting. Okay, Fooey. I want you to notice two things in particular here. Notice this spire right there. You see it? Okay. And notice this barber pole right there. It's not really a barber pole. It's a lighthouse. Okay. Notice the spire and notice the lighthouse. Those are the two things I want you to notice. Joppa is one of the oldest ports in the world. It's the oldest port on the Mediterranean Sea. And it is located on that road I told you about, the Via Maris. Anytime Egypt wanted to move north, they went to Via Maris. Anytime Assyria or Babylon wanted to move south, they went to Via Maris. That was the route the armies took. That was the route that travelers took. That was the easiest route. Next week, I'll show you why it's the easiest route. But that's it. Joppa is right along there. And this is the Shephelah is the way to pronounce it, which is the low hills. And then this is the hill country where Jerusalem is. All right. But anyway, that's where Joppa is. And the history, the legend is that the name of Joppa was settled by the son of Noah named Japheth. And that's why it's called Joppa or Jaffa or today they call it Yafo, Y-A-F-O. And it's a part of the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. In fact, they call the area Tel Aviv Yafo. That's what they call it. All right. Like I told you, about 37 miles northwest of Jerusalem, a little bit northwest of Lydda. And it's strategically located until Herod the Great built that port we're going to talk about next week, Caesarea Maritima. Until he built that about 35 miles north, that was the only way to sail into or out of Israel. Okay, so what do we know about Joppa in the Bible? Well, here's some things we know about Joppa in the Bible. The seaport of Joppa is where the materials for the building of the temple were shipped. Remember, Hiram of Tyre shipped the materials down to Joppa. They were brought inland in from Joppa to Jerusalem to build the Temple of Solomon and the Palace of Solomon. And I think probably the Temple of David, though the Bible doesn't specifically say that. But that's where the materials came in. Rather than taking them overland and going through all those hills and valleys and stuff like that, they sailed down to Joppa and then came in. All right. Where else have you ever heard of Joppa? Anybody you can think of that took a boat out of Joppa? Jonah. Jonah. The Lord said, go east, young man. And Jonah says, I think I'll go west, right? He takes a ship from Joppa, and instead of going 400 miles east, he heads 2,500 miles west, trying to get as far away from God's will as he possibly could. And that's the book of Jonah, Jonah chapter 1, verse 3. God had to do quite a sales job on Jonah to get him to do what he intended for him to do, right? And what did that sales job involve? Well, there was a storm at sea. He got thrown overboard expecting to die. He got swallowed by a great fish. He got vomited up onto the land. Nobody wanted to be around Jonah after that. And then he finally decided God was serious, and so he heads to Nineveh. And he preaches, and he preaches. And let me tell you, Pastor this morning was talking about how good a preacher Ricky is. He doesn't hold a candle to Jonah. Not a candle. Because Nineveh was within 40 days of being destroyed. Jonah goes up there and preaches and converts the lot of them. Saves the city for another 150 years before it's finally destroyed. Now that's some powerful preaching. Okay. And you know what? It made him mad. How many preachers do you know who get mad at responses? No, you don't come down. No, go back to your chair. That's not in our DNA, right? Okay. So anyway, that's one place we read about it. The other place we read about it, another place in the Old Testament we read about it is when the Israelites, or when the folks from Judah returned from Babylon. That's where the materials were sent again to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so the temple that we've got leading up to Jesus' day, the basic materials were brought in through Joppa. And then, of course, we read about it in the New Testament in the book of Acts chapter 9. Right after the story of Aeneas at Lydda, 12 miles away, Peter gets the message, come over to Joppa. We've got a dear sister who just died. Now, remember, we're talking a church that is just in its infancy. Probably a group of people who have been converted by the preaching of Philip, because he's been on his way up to Caesarea. And so this is a group of people. They send to Peter. Peter comes. He raises Tabitha from the dead. You know, she's known by Tabitha. She's known by Dorcas, means gazelle. That's Acts chapter 9, verses 36 to 41. And that's really what we know about Joppa, except this, Acts 9, 42 to 43, finishing that story. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one Simon, a tanner. Notice that house there. I'll tell you about it in a minute. All right, there's that picture of Joppa again that I told you about. Remember the barber pole and the spire. Remember those two things, okay? No problem, no problem. All right. Here's a picture of Joppa up against Tel Aviv. The last time I was in Israel, my first night, I stayed in one of these hotels right here. And so my view was of Joppa at night. Beautiful view. There's a closer view of it. And there you again see the spire, but you don't see the barber pole, the lighthouse. The spire that I pointed out to you is St. Peter's Church. This is something we'll see a lot of in Israel. And that is people don't agree on what happened where. For example, you get to the crucifixion. The Catholic tradition is it happened right under their church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the tomb is also conveniently in the same church. Okay? Protestants say, oh, no, it happened out of town over here. Well, the fact of the matter is in the first century, where the church was out of town. It was outside the city. So who knows? It could be one, it could be the other, it could be neither. Okay? You'll have the same thing happen in other places where people will say something happened at this location, others will say it happened at this location. A lot of times you'll have a Catholic interpretation of where it is, a Greek Orthodox interpretation of where it is, and a Protestant interpretation of where it is. So don't get too hung up on precise locations. Get the vision, get the picture in your mind. That's the important thing right there. And especially in Jerusalem, because everybody's got a different take on everything there. In Galilee, you won't see that much. But there's St. Peter's Church. St. Peter's Church, they say, is built on top of Simon the Tanner's house. That's the Catholic tradition. That's not the tradition most people hold. All right. Notice Andromeda's rock right here. This was a first century legend about the king of Joppa tying his virgin daughter to the rock to calm the storm, the sea god Poseidon. And a fella came back from killing Medusa. Perseus came back from killing Medusa, and he saw her, and he killed a sea monster that Poseidon had sent and rescued her. Well, that's the story there on that one. We don't buy that one. And then there are some excavations going on. You can see behind the sea port area right there. Okay, that's the way it looks today. There's part of the excavations. I'll tell you about some of them in a minute. This is Joppa from the west, looking on it from the west. This is Joppa from the southwest. Now, here you can see the spire of St. Peter's Church, and you can also see the lighthouse. Now, the reason I keep telling you about the lighthouse, I've told you that the Catholic tradition is that St. Peter's Church is where Simon the Tanner's house was. See that lighthouse? See that little Muslim tower, minaret there? See that? Okay, just the other side of that wall is where most people believe Simon the Tanner's house was. Okay, and I'll show it to you here in a minute. This is the harbor. Now it only takes small boats. That's what a little, town. Isn't that nice and idyllic? Doesn't that look nice? Okay. There's the house of Simon the Tanner, but it's right up against that Muslim mosque. Now, they call it the house of Simon the Tanner. There's what it looks like from another angle. It's and it was really nice of Simon to put his name above the door. And it was really especially nice that he did it in English so we can read it. Maybe he needed to hire a better sign painter, but it's nice. If you want to know where it is, just walk around till you see it on top of the door. Okay, the Zachariah family lives there. They'll let you in. They'll take you up on the roof. They'll show you the place, and it's just wonderful. It gives you the sense of being there. The only problem is, it's not the house. Napoleon leveled Joppa in 1799. This house was built in the 19th century. In fact, you can tell by looking at it that it's not a first century house. You've got that scroll stone sitting above it. It's not a first century house. That archway, that's not the way they built houses in the first century, especially not Jewish houses in the first century. So this is clearly a couple of centuries old. So sorry, guys. It may be the right location, may not be the right location, but it's not the right house. All right. And then downtown Joppa, you've got this. What do you suppose that's talking about? Jonah's fish. Here are some archaeological digs in Joppa that date back to the 14th and 13th centuries BC. That right there is a reconstruction. This is another thing you'll see a lot in Israel. You'll see a lot of reconstructions. The reason is because people break things. And so when they find an artifact that they want to preserve, they'll make a duplicate of it for the location. They'll take the original and put it in the Israel Museum. So a lot of the stuff we see, what you're seeing is a reproduction, and that's the thing you got there. This is a Ramses II reconstruction, 13th century BC, of a gate that was built by Thutmose III, who was the one that I told you about that took over Lot, okay? Contemporary with Moses. So this is contemporary with the Exodus. There's an Egyptian bronze fortress that goes by that gate. And so these are some of the things that are seen there. This is a lion temple. This is a Canaanite temple. Now, I want to show you something. This is a first century house, Jewish house, that's been excavated that probably was destroyed in the Jewish Roman revolt in 70 AD. It dates back to that period of time. There's Tel Aviv. Oh, incidentally, I got to tell you this. There is a reference in the Bible to Tel Aviv. It is Ezekiel 3:15, but it's not this Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv means hill of the spring. And the Tel Aviv that's mentioned in Ezekiel 3:15 is a location in Babylon. It's not a location here. So it's not the same. So if you look it up in your concordance, see Tel Aviv and go, oh, wow, I know where that is. Nope, it's over in Babylon, 400 miles away. Okay, this is a Philistine temple that was discovered in Tel Aviv, in the environs around Joppa and Tel Aviv, right there. There are three phases of it, and you read about Canaanite temples a lot in the Old Testament. Notice those two pillars there. The way this temple was built, they had those two limestone bases, and they had two huge cedar posts sitting on top of them that supported the roof. Do you see a problem with that? A guy named Samson's the problem with that, right? Because, guess what? This is Judges 16, verses 23 to 30. This is not the temple, by the way. This is not, but it's one like it. It's one like it. It's built like it. So, Samson, you heard the story about Samson, and he gives a big mighty shove, knocks those cedar posts over, the whole place caves in, kills him and everybody in the temple. All right. So that's the story of the overall geographical area of Israel, Lydda and Joppa. Now, what kind of lessons can we get from this? Well, do you see any lessons by comparing Jonah and Peter? Do you see any lessons? Yeah, okay. They both went west, didn't they? Okay. How about this? God sent Jonah to the Gentiles, right? Jonah didn't want to go. Why didn't Jonah want to go to Nineveh? Because Nineveh was oppressing Israel at the time. And the last people this is like this question that, I love that this morning. I see all these connections with the sermons. This morning, he says, how many of you want Hillary Clinton to become a Christian, right? Donald Trump's barber, okay, all this hairdresser, whatever he is. I don't know what he is. Anyway, all these guys, okay. The answer should always be yes. Jonah was one who kept his hand down when they said Hillary Clinton. He doesn't want her, he's one to pick and choose, right? That's Jonah. So Jonah heads the other direction because he doesn't want to go talk to the ethnics that God had sent him to. And when he does go and preach, and the whole town, the whole city's converted, then who's the only person in the room who's mad? Jonah. I knew it. I knew it. Boy, he's confident in his preaching. I knew if I came and preached, I'd have a better response than Billy Graham. I knew they'd all turn to you. I knew you wouldn't follow through. That's why I didn't want to go, right? That's Jonah's attitude. What's Peter's attitude? I'm going to go, right? Now, God had to do a sales job on Peter. We'll talk about that next week. But if you look at what's going on here, Peter heads from Jerusalem. He goes to Lydda, and he finds that believer, Jewish believer, and heals him. He goes to Joppa, raises Dorcas from the dead, stays in the house of Simon the tanner, and then he gets some messengers from Caesarea that say, there's a Gentile who wants to talk to you, and God says he wants you to go. See the difference between Jonah? And so the suggestion that I have here is Jonah disobeyed the Lord, ran from the presence of the Lord, and that's something we may sometimes do. We need to align ourselves with the will of God. Peter aligned himself with the will of God, trusted in God, took the gospel to the Gentiles in Caesarea. I don't know, is anybody in here besides me glad that he talked to Cornelius? If it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't be here, right? When we obey, we find life. When we disobey, we find destruction and problems. And so what kind of problems are we facing in our lives because of disobedience in our lives? You know what? I have time for this other song. There's another song that you may or may not have heard. I could not find one with accompaniment. This one, and I'm glad you're going back there because it's loud. This one is actually a song that is, have y'all ever heard this one, Jesus Rose of Sharon? This one is sung a cappella. It's 4-part harmony, a cappella. So if you know the song, great. If you don't know the song, just follow along with the words because it comes from the same passage that Lily of the Valley talk came about, the plain of Sharon, okay? Jesus Rose of Sharon, bloom within my heart, beauties of thy truth and holiness impart, that where'er I go, my life may shed abroad fragrance of the knowledge of the love of God. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, bloom in radiance and in love within my heart. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, sweeter far to see than the fairest flowers of earth could ever be. Fill my life completely, adding more each day of thy grace divine and purity, I pray. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, bloom in radiance and in love within my heart. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, balm for every ill. May thy tender mercy's healing power is still. For
every burden then, giving immortal self and hope again. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, lumen radiance and in love within my heart. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, bloom forevermore. Be thy glory seen on earth from shore to shore. Till the nations own thy sovereignty complete. Lay their honors down and worship at thy feet. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, bloom in radiance and in love within my heart.
Good song. Okay, folks, that is our introduction, Lydda and Joppa. Now, next week, this is the kind of one of the reasons I wanted to talk about those places this week is because they kind of segue into next week. But the other reason is next week's one of my favorite places in all of Israel. And I wanted to make sure that I had as many people here for it as possible. Didn't want to miss anybody. If you're here today and you haven't got a name tag, be sure and make sure Jim has your name so he can, and your email address, so he can keep in touch with you, but so he can make name tags for you, okay? Hope you'll be here. Bring your friends. We'll fill this room up, and come November, that weekend, we'll go right across over there, and we'll have more room. In the meantime, next week, we're going to talk about Caesarea, one of my all-time favorite places. In the meantime, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Thank you,
Thank you, Dale.
Dale.